Basically, I had a dream that I was in my room and I was having sex with a girlfriend. She's always reluctant to have anal sex. Sorry, this is relevant. So she was crawling away on all fours playfully, escaping me, playfully trying to have anal sex with her. Suddenly though, my dream was hijacked. 3 cats appeared in our room and a bunch of objects moved on their own. This is when the dream's vividness and lucidity became enhanced and very raw and unnerving. I pointed to a decoration hanging on the wall and was like, look, it's moving on its own. My girlfriend was then sitting in a chair next to the bed, feeling very uncomfortable, when her pillow on the bed sank like someone placed their head on it. I yelled, look, and as we stared, the rest of her spot on the bed sunk down. We wanted to leave the bedroom, so we opened the door, and right outside our bedroom was my aunt for some reason. Then, the carpet in front of us depressed, like something was standing on it. Then the carpet turned into white linen, raised up and started engulfing my aunt while she cried for help. I wanted to move forward, but my body was paralysed, and it felt like my real body was paralysed for some reason. But when I was paralysed, I was shown just a still vision of my living room window with the blinds up, looking down at my sunny lawn. Then I snapped back to my aunt being sucked down into the linen, and the linen falling to the floor in a pile, while I could still hear my aunt's muffled cries for help. I ran to her and yelled, "Give her back! Let her go!" And I reached for the linen, and lots of dust particles blew around me. And then my body went paralysed again, and I was shown the same exact still vision of my sunny yard. This time I really struggled to move so I could save my aunt, and then it felt like I was forced or shunted out of my dream. It felt like I was being a nuisance and was ejected from it. So I woke up in a jolt, and it was jarring. When I woke up, it was raining and thundering, which was unsettling. Then, my girlfriend made a noise in her sleep, and it caught my attention, so I was listening closely. Then she screamed some gibberish and woke up frantically. I guess that gibberish was actually "go away," but in Hmong. She's Hmong. She said her dream took place in the same location. First our bedroom and then our living room. She said that while her dream was going, an entity showed up outside our living room window. The same one that I kept being forced to look at while paralysed. She said it looked like a female body, but it was totally black, like a shadow, and had large butterfly wings. She said it was sort of beautiful in a way, but it was also terrifying because it had red, glowing eyes. After some talking, she said that her dreams started out sexual as well. Then, later in the day, she also told me it was me trying to have anal sex with her. The similarities really made us uncomfortable, and the dream was extremely vivid. She was very shaken up, and we thought it was also strange how we both woke up in the same 30 seconds from similar nightmares regarding evil entities involving the same window in our living room. She often dreams more of a family's house rather than her own. She's really groggy this morning because she was afraid to go to sleep last night because she was so scared. So I don't know if this is paranormal, but there were just so many similarities that we felt it wasn't a coincidence. We've both been on edge since it happened Saturday night. It doesn't help that another storm hit last night, and now we have hail damage to both our cars. Anyways, that's what we're dealing with at the moment, and we're weirded out. My maternal grandmother died in May of 2017, after suffering with heart problems for a year. My family and I visited her at the hospital when she fainted. She never regained consciousness and was on life support to the final day of her life. I don't know her that well, and I wasn't close to her. A few weeks after her death, I dreamt of her and she messaged me in the dream. It was in a language I didn't understand, and the words looked like they were upside down or backwards. I was in a garden and receiving her messages through texts on a large tablet or phone. This was how we last communicated when she was alive. I only ever spoke to her through the phone. In December of 2017, we visited her at a gravesite. We went in the day and noticed a Christmas tree inside the chapel. My mom immediately wanted to buy an ornament for the tree, since you could add the name of the person buried at the cemetery and their birth-death date. However, we had other things to see and do, as my grandmother is buried in a cemetery 3 hours away from our home. We were touring the city she lived in, as my mom lived there as a teenager. We went back at night, close to 9 p.m. My sister drove us there, and there were 8 of us in the car. That day, we met 2 office ladies and spoke to them for a while. It was windy and raining at night, and I remember feeling incredibly freaked out. I didn't want to be there any longer. I saw my mom and sister go into the chapel and put the ornament in the tree. After they came out, the door shut behind them. In the car, we were all freaked out, but figured it was the wind. My mom and sister went to say a last goodbye to my grandmother. She was conversing with them and laughing. She waved her goodbyes and walked away. My mom and sister got in the car, made a comment about the weather, and I asked, why was the office lady there? They turned around to me with shocked looks on their faces and asked me, what office lady? My grandma is around 75 years of age. She lives alone and prefers being a recluse. The house she lives in has been the subject of discussion for many moons. Creepy stories, supernatural stuff, and that sort of stuff have always been exchanged during family gatherings. And my mother and her siblings had tried to get her out of the house and move in with one of us many times, but to no avail. She simply likes to be left alone. So at this point, I'm around 15 years old. My father never let me or my siblings stay away for longer than a day. We saw our grandma at least once a month, because my dad enjoys long drives, but we always return by nightfall. So my grandma always complains that she never gets time with us because all of my other cousins stay with her during summer. So when I turned 15, my dad had an epiphany. He says it would be good for me and my younger sibling to stay with my grandma for a few days. Now the stories we have heard are kind of scary, so my younger sister, who's afraid of the dark, wasn't looking forward to it that much. But I convinced her it was all fake, and that if the house was haunted, my grandma wouldn't have been able to live in that place for so long. She's not completely convinced, but she agrees. On the other hand, I was really looking forward to it. I had all the freedom to call my friends at night, and nobody would say anything. And when it comes to ghosts, I simply didn't believe they existed. I came from a family of strong theists. I believed in a God who would protect me, and that blind belief rendered me oblivious to supernatural demons and whatnot. So my sister and I went to her place. Now, there are 3 bedrooms in the whole house. One is where my grandma sleeps, one is where my grandpa used to sleep, and one is known to be the most haunted room out of all. My grandpa's room had his stuff on the bed, so my choices were to sleep in my grandma's room or the haunted room. I picked the haunted one, easily. Not because I was brave, but because it was private and I could talk to my friends at night. My sister said she would sleep with my grandma. The first day was fine. I didn't get much sleep that night. In fact, I slept early in the morning because it was impossible for me to sleep in that room for whatever reason. Now the thing about that room is the windows are all wooden, so not even a bit of light would get in. The third day, my sister says she's going to start sleeping with me, because my grandma apparently had a creepy habit of walking around the house in the middle of the night. So on the 4th day, my sister and I are together in bed. At around 2, I hear the pendulum clock ringing through the house. I know my grandma is up because I hear shuffling outside the room. My sister is asleep beside me. It was pitch dark in the room and I wasn't particularly afraid. I was just randomly thinking about stuff, about my teenage drama. I'm facing upwards looking into the dark, and one of my hands is hanging out of the bed, above my head. Our bed didn't have a headboard, but had a wood covering on the top and bottom. So I'm in my own head, and my train of thought gets broken by something hitting behind my bed, like somebody knocked on it once. I freeze, and my mind is racing, so I think it was me. My hand is still hanging back. I must have jerked it unconsciously. So I stay like that, aware of my hand still hanging back. My sister is still sleeping beside me. A few seconds later, again a huge knock, this time a bit more loudly and strongly. Now guys, at this point, I'm officially scared. I slowly pull my hands down. It was pitch dark, and I couldn't get a single word out of my mouth to call my sister. I pull my hands down, and I touch my sister's hand, and I squeeze it. And this is no joke. My sister jerks herself away, doesn't even ask me what's wrong, and starts chanting mantras my dad taught us. I join her, and a few seconds later, a lighter knock behind the bed. This time, both of us hear it. We hug each other, too scared to do anything, and continue praying. When dawn broke and my grandma was officially awake, we switched on the light and checked the entire room for rats or holes that could come in. And nothing. There was nothing behind the bed, nor beneath it. My grandma was a clean freak. There will never be a rat in that house anyways. I go back to bed and fall asleep. We don't say anything to anyone. We called our parents to bring us back, but they weren't home, and my dad told us to buck up. We continued to live in that house in that room for a month. In fact, we barely got out of the room. I don't know why. By the end of the month, we got attached to the room in the house. A lot of creepy and scary things followed that week, but Dad said to buck up, so we bucked up. We went back home after a month and told my mom about everything that happened. It was after I left that room in that house that I realised I felt lighter doing so. My aunts, after hearing our stories, screamed at my mom for letting us stay there so long. Apparently, my uncle went crazy in that room. He shut off all the ventilators and made sure no light came in and locked himself in the room for months. My family had to sign him into an asylum. It took years of recovery to get him out of his own head. After that, we never stayed there alone. But that said, my sister and I stopped being afraid of the house after a whole month. When we go back, there's a sort of welcoming vibe. It's like we made peace with the contests of the house, whatever it was. But I'll never forget what happened that month. This story happened in my hometown, when I think I was about 8 to 9 years old. My hometown is very small, though there are multiple neighbourhoods and occasional abandoned house left to rot. At that time, I didn't know much of the town's history, but I knew of an old building that was called the Old Town Name School, by classmates and teachers. Anyway, one day I was walking to school, and since the abandoned building is on my way, I took a glance at it. In one of the windows of the house, I saw a pure white curtain, flapping around because of the wind. Behind the curtain, there were 3 elderly women. They seemed to be having a conversation before looking down from the window at me, making eye contact. I still have a vivid memory of the look on one of the women's faces, a face of confusion. I quickly broke eye contact and continued walking to school. I don't remember what happened that day, except for that strange experience. I don't know what I saw that day, if it really happened, and if I was supposed to see it. For all I know, it could be a dream. The only people I've told about this experience were my mum and my friend. My mum said that I saw ghosts, like a past student of the school, but other than that, she laughed it off. My friend, on the other hand, was creeped out by the story, also telling me that I probably saw ghosts. For extra information, there's no reason for people to be entering the building, and there's no accessible entrance. The area around the building is all covered in weeds, vines, and bushes. All windows and doors are boarded up with wood, and nobody investigates the building's area. I do Civil War reenacting, and I'm often at original forts for this. One I did in February of this year was in Texas and is an original Civil War fort that was also occupied by Buffalo soldiers. This reenactment took place over an incredibly cold weekend, with freezing temperatures and sleet, and was fully immersive. Nothing post-1865 was allowed. We were representing new Confederate recruits, tasked with keeping the fort, and by extension, the frontier safe. We did everything as they would have, from reveal to drill to food, etc. With this, we had guard duty, taking place from 11 to reveal at 6. Each man was assigned a 1-hour time span, during which he had to watch the horses and make sure no one stole them, and spend the rest of the hour awake and aware. We stayed in an original building that had long since fallen down, but provided a place for a fire and at least some shelter from the wind and rain. My watch was at 2, and I quickly checked the horses and hunkered down. About 20 minutes in, I heard some voices in the distance, probably 50 to 100 yards away. But anytime I tried to focus on them, they'd disappear. I questioned it, but largely ignored it. A couple minutes later, I heard someone approaching where I was, it being obvious since the area around the building was stone, and we had hobnails on our shoes, and then heard them step into the room I was in. It had been established earlier that anyone who fell asleep would be punished, and people had already faced corporal punishment for infractions. So I quickly turned to what I expected to be my CO, and no one was there. I left the room and looked around, but could find no one. I went back and waited for my hour to be up, all the while hearing steps and voices again. I got my replacement and went back to sleep. The next morning, I got to talking with others. Without me saying anything, I had someone ask whether I heard voices during the night. As we've discussing this, another fella comes up and tells us, "Did y'all hear anything weird last night?" I had about everyone who was there correlate my experience independently of one another. Everything from voices to footsteps to spurs. This place was isolated, no one else was up, and everyone had nearly the exact same story. I'm not sure what it was, and I've never had a paranormal experience before or since, but it left me rattled. Also, as I mentioned earlier, we were representing Confederate soldiers. The fort had housed Buffalo soldiers, some of which had been murdered while they were there. If any spirit would have a reason to get pissed at us, that would be the one. It was 2010. I was still very young and was scared of the dark and unnatural from an early age, like most people. Yet I was so deeply curious about these things. The house we owned at the time was quite big. Only a singular floor, but it had this really long corridor, maybe 15 meters throughout the entire house. The layout of the house was quite peculiar. The kids' rooms were on one side, and the kitchen and living rooms being in the middle, and my parents' rooms being on the opposite side. One night, as I was drifting off to bed, I felt uneasy going to sleep alone. My parents didn't mind me coming into their room to sleep, as they know how I was in the dark, and just wanted me to get some sleep at night. The procedure of sprinting down the hallway was nothing new to me. It terrified me to primal levels, but I could feel safe after I was snuggled in my parents' bed. My parents' bed was big and comfortable. It was quite high off the ground too, so it wasn't an uncommon place to go during hide and seek. The sound of the carpet while crawling under is forever stuck in my head because of how distinct it is. I laid silently in my parents' bed, content that I was safe. After around 5 minutes of laying in that bed, that sound, it was there. I heard 4 or 5 drags of someone or something quite heavy under there. Then nothing. My siblings were all asleep, and there were no pets in the house. Just my family and whatever was under that bed. I tucked my head under the blankets and silently sobbed, terrified, waiting for the morning to come. I did actually get some sleep, but I'll never forget what I heard that night. This actually happened 4 years ago. So my dad passed away. It was completely sudden, as he seemed healthy. At the time, I was a senior in high school, so I took off some time to calm myself and be with my mom. I'm an only child, by the way. 2-ish weeks after the funeral, my mom and I decided to head out and take a walk. If I remember correctly, it was the first time I got out of the house. I was really depressed due to his passing. So around 12 p.m, I decided that I had enough interaction with the world for the day and told my mom I'll head home first. She gave me her keys, said she'd go to the bakery and come home after. So I reach our house and notice that our outdoor light is on. Well, that wouldn't have been weird if it was on when we left. It wasn't. Not me, nor my mom turned it on. And the switch is inside the house, so no one can turn it on from outside. I mean, it was 12 p.m. We left at 10 p.m. There was no need for this light to be on. Still, I shrug it off and open the door. I had a very weird feeling when I went inside. I can't really explain it, but I just felt anxious about something. Anyway, at first, I didn't notice anything weird around our house until I went to my mom's room. And oh my god, was it a mess? The light was on here as well. I had some books on a chair there, and they were all scattered on the floor. Some travel bags and suitcases that were in the closet were chilling on the floor in front of the bedroom door. The closet was closed. The drawers from my mum's dresser were open, and some of the stuff she kept in there was scattered on the floor. Same picture in my room as well. Cupboards open, books scattered across the floor. Heck, even my mum's pillow was in my room. Some figurines I had on my desk were rearranged, and that's pretty much it. I went to check the living room and saw that only some cupboards were open and some drawers. I was really surprised they were, actually, because someone would need lots of strength to open these specific drawers, and it was almost impossible to open them all the way. They were pretty old and difficult to open, but someone did just that. So, I did what every normal person would do. I stayed there and started to clean up. I checked every inch of the house. Nothing, absolutely nothing was missing. My wallet, some cash my mom had, were there. Our laptops were there. My phone was still charging. Nothing was missing. Even the door outside was locked when I got home. I checked the attic. Nothing. Checked outside. Nothing. No one could have broken into our house, and there were no signs that someone did. I even checked for any hidden cameras. The drawers in the living room gave me hell. I still don't get how someone managed to open them all the way. I managed to clean everything up before my mum arrived. And during all this time I was cleaning, I still had that weird feeling. Now, some people have told me that when someone has recently passed away, you may still feel their presence around you. Well, my dad and mum did not live together, and the feeling I had did not make me feel good, or safe, or any of that. It made me extremely anxious. When my mom came home, I explained what had happened and asked if she had left any lights on or gave anyone the keys to our house. She said she didn't. Even today, I don't know what happened back then. I even thought that an earthquake had happened and I didn't realise. But aside from our bedrooms and those drawers in the living room, the other rooms were perfectly fine. Nothing was out of place. When I was about 5 years old, my parents purchased their first house. It was located about an hour from Los Angeles, at the edge of Ventura County in California. I'd describe the area as a suburban paradise, but it wasn't always paradise living there. There were a few events that stood out to me over the years. I can't say for sure when these happened. Up until recently, I tried to forget about all this, but I can't. So here it is. The first event I can remember, I remember specifically it was Christmas Eve. I was at an age where there was still a magical feeling about the holiday. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, feeling very excited. I knew I couldn't open the presents under the tree yet, so I meant to just go and have a look on what was to come. I remember getting out of bed and looking down the hallway that led to the living room. where the tree was located. You couldn't see the tree from the hallway. It was more to the left than I could see from there, but you could see where the dining room table was, and in one of their chairs was a dark figure. I remember it was very tall. I couldn't make out any features really. It was oddly human shaped, but I couldn't make out legs or arms, just what happened to be a head and 4 red glowing eyes. From years of trying to block this memory, I can't remember if it was 4 eyes on one head or 2 separate heads with 2 eyes on each, but I remember there being 4 eyes, seemingly looking directly at me. When I saw this, I darted directly into my parents' room across the hall and woke them. I explained what I saw quietly, as I didn't want the entity to hear me, but my parents, half asleep, assured me it was a dream. I knew this wasn't true, and that they weren't going to do anything, so I got on the ground and started crawling back to my room. I remember pausing in the hallway and looking back where the figure stood, and there was nothing. It was gone. I didn't dare to investigate further, and I've never seen this since. Throughout the years, not much happened. Sometimes it sounded like someone called your name, but when you asked everyone else in the house, they said they didn't do it. Seemed to happen often, and to mostly my mom. I never thought much of it. This was about it for years and years. Later I learned that my father had an experience. He said he woke up in the night for a glass of water and started out in the hallway and witnessed a see-through figure. He simply said it was a large figure that you could see through, like a mist. He said he shrugged it off as a dream later, but in the moment, it freaked him out. Years later, actually about 2 years ago, the activity definitely escalated. At the time, I adopted a new hobby and would work at it in the garage late at night. Every time I worked there, it felt like something was watching me. I was constantly looking over my shoulder. I never actually saw or heard anything, but somehow I really felt like something was there. The house creaks a lot. I always had, but it seemed to be doing it way more than normal at the time. It only added to my paranoia. Oftentimes, I see shadows in my peripheral vision, especially looking down the hallway at night. I remember one time I was sitting on the couch in the living room, laying down, looking at my phone, and I saw a shadow in the shape of a hand reaching toward me through the corner of my eye. And when I looked directly at it, it slowly slithered away. It seemed so surreal that I didn't even know what to think or how to react. I kind of just sat there stunned. I couldn't stop thinking about the possibility of an entity being in the house. It consumed me. As things got worse, one night, I was looking down at the trash in a wastebasket in the bathroom, and it was moving in an odd fashion. When I noticed this, I went straight to bed to sleep. But when I got there, I heard heavy breathing right next to me. I shut my eyes tight, didn't dare open them. I felt frozen in fear. This lasted about a full minute. When I opened my eyes and looked, there was nothing there. Things seemed to fall all the time with no explanation. I would say a few months of this fear went by without taking action. One of my friends had mentioned in the past that he heard strange noises at night. He then soon became really religious and never spoke of it again. I asked him what happened, and he said Jesus made it better. I decided I'd join the church and get help with my problem. I spoke to a pastor about what was going on, and he instructed me on blessing the house with anointed oil. He blessed some oil and gave me a prayer, and I went to work. I was instructed to pray over the house and go over all the windows and doors with the oil while painting. At first, this didn't seem to work. I was told it may take a few times. I would bless the house once a week at first, but things seemingly got worse. I was instructed to say, "In the name of Jesus, leave this place," every time I thought something was going on. One time, I saw a strange light dancing around in the living room. At first, looking for a reasonable explanation. Passing cars? No, couldn't be. It was too constant. So I said, "Be gone in the name of Jesus," and it stopped. But in that exact moment, I heard a noise, like something fell. I shrugged it off. The next day, we found out the fridge's water filtration system broke and was leaking everywhere. Soon after, I heard a scratching noise in the wall, and I was overcome with fear. So I said it again, "Begone in the name of Jesus," and again it immediately stopped. The next day, we found out the bathroom lights no longer worked, as well as the hallway lights. Later we had the electrician test it, and they said a line must have been cut for that part. Must have been a rat. I thought that was odd. Then my dreams started being affected. One night, I had a dream that the devil was speaking to me through a hole in the ground in the ruins where my house once stood. He was trying to convince me to stop following Jesus, and oddly enough, my dream was being convicted. Sometimes I'd be awakened to animal noises. It usually sounded like a growling dog. I had a cat in the house, but he never made a sound like that, and it sounded close by, as if in the other room, not outside. My mother told me one night she was half asleep and opened her eyes to see a large dark figure. The next day, she asked me if I went into her room. She thought it was me. It wasn't. She said the more she looked at it, the more it faded, and eventually you wouldn't see it. Another night I was awoken to very, very loud screeching. This time it was too loud for me to ignore. I rushed out of bed to investigate. Of course, there was nothing. I woke up everyone and asked if they heard it. Of course, no. But as far as reasonable explanations go for that one, I remember seeing multiple owls in the backyard when I took out the trash early that night, and it did sound like an owl screech. It was just unreasonably loud. The last time I remember having anything strange is I was having a haunted house dream, and in the dream there was activity, and once more I said it, "Begone in the name of Jesus." And the dream ended, and I woke up to hear a strange whimpering noise, like a whimpering dog. Again, something I doubt my cat would do. After that, I blessed the house every day for a while, and eventually my fear faded, and there was never anything again, suggesting there was anything out of the ordinary. Flash forward a few years, and nothing happened. But I was looking through my Facebook archived messages. There were a bunch of messages I never saw somehow. Most interestingly, there was a guy who messaged me claiming he used to live in that house. I thought that was really odd at first. How could he know I lived there? Well, I googled my address and my family's name came up. That settled that. So I responded to him. In his original message, he was asking if I noticed anything about the house, or if it was all his crazy family. This message was sitting in my inbox for years, it seemed. I thought if I responded now, there was no way I'd get a response. I did. He basically confirmed my suspicion. He said his family was the first family in that house after it was built, and there was strange activity even back then. He told me his brother once saw a woman in the closet. Sometimes they'd hear talking with no explanation. And it wasn't just them. Apparently neighbours had stories too. It's a town with Native American history. My only explanation at this point is when they were building, they didn't realise something must have been nearby. There's a park nearby too, that's rumoured to be haunted. This just happened. I'm wide awake and a bit freaked out. Just to preface this, I'm staying in Vegas at a popular downtown hotel. So basically, I don't know if I was dreaming or not. I'm pretty sure I was, because after this, I felt like I woke up. I was laying in bed, and it sounded like someone was using the bathroom, and I heard the door close and loud footsteps walking towards the foot of the bed. Then, it feels like someone is climbing into the bed onto me, and my head starts feeling very strange. I don't know how to describe it, but I got the feeling it was trying to enter me. I don't know if it was the feeling I got, but whatever it was on top of my chest. I was struggling and couldn't speak fully. I was trying desperately to wake up my wife. I could still use my right arm, which I could use to nudge her, but she didn't wake up. During this, I'm trying to speak, but I can't speak fully. It was like I could mumble a word out here and there, but it was a fight. When I would look where it would be on top of me, there was nothing there but the blankets were like up, as if they were up and over it, but the entity didn't reveal itself. I'm not sure how it concluded. Like I said, it felt like I woke up. There are details about the room during the event that makes me think it was a dream. I think things are different, but I don't know if this was a separate dream or not. Before coming here, I was reading reviews about this hotel, and a woman had a similar experience. It sounded like she was sure it really happened though. But after reading, I rebooked my room in a different tower, than the one mentioned in the review. So yeah, I've never in my life had sleep paralysis. The more I think about it, the more it sounds like sleep paralysis. But this is weird for sure. My wife just woke up saying she had a dream we were running and something was chasing us but couldn't see it. But earlier, and said I was just laying there. I don't know what to think right now. I'm supposed to be here 2 more nights and we're considering leaving, but we think we're going to give it another night. The family that lived in my childhood home, prior to us, had a boy named Jack. Jack grew up to be a sergeant in the US Army and fought in the Korean War, where he was killed in action. My siblings and I were adopted from Korea and grew up in this house, knowing that a boy who lived here before us had died fighting for our countries. Our main source of information was our elderly neighbour lady, so we all really knew that his name was Jack, and that his plane had supposedly been shot down over Busan. In 1999, my little brother was adopted. His name is John, but we all call him Jack. Though I often thought he was named after Jack in the house, my parents both denied this to be the case. At some point in the early 2000s, the surviving members of the previous family were in town and stopped by our house. They were curious about how it looked and wanted to reminisce about their childhood memories. They were introduced to us kids, and my brother Jack. They commented that it was sort of neat that there was another Jack in the house, and my parents clarified that his name is technically John. We learned then that the previous Jack had also been a John. He and my brother also share a middle name, though with different spellings. Weird coincidence, right? Well, the coincidences don't stop there. My brother's bedroom had also been late Jack's room, contrary to what my family had always believed. My Busan-born brother's room was decorated in an airplane theme at the time, adding a cherry on top to the whole bizarre coincidence Sunday. At least if you recall what we were told by the neighbour lady regarding Jack's alleged death. Recently, I did some digging, and I've come to discover that, based upon Jack's division in the army, he wouldn't have likely been flying planes at all. In fact, his date of death and the time frame suggested by the division movements places him probably around the Busan perimeter, but not perhaps within Busan proper. Even without that perfect level of synchronicity, we're still left with the odd happenstance of my brother sharing the same first and middle names and bedroom with a man who grew up in this house before us. For more of a speculative paranormal edition, my brother grew up having night terrors, and by his teenage years, he ceased to sleep in his bedroom entirely. He set up shop in the spare room in the basement. He was very tight-lipped about anything that may or may not have occurred in the house. He is terrified of ghosts and the supernatural. He hates to stay at the house alone, and he and my dad both claim to have heard laughter and conversation coming from the room where the previous family used to listen to the radio together. My dad finds this faint chatter comforting and kind of neat. My brother feels, essentially, the exact opposite. I've not really encountered anything, but I really just was prompted to write all this because I came home after a few days out and my brother's bedroom light was on. My dad never comes upstairs, and when I asked him about it, he actually immediately suggested I had left it on or someone had broken in. When I left the house last week, I had to use my phone's flashlight to navigate because I left so early in the morning that it was still dark out. This also isn't the first time I've come home to find his bedroom light on. I'm trying to tell myself maybe it's a wiring problem, but I'm not going to pretend I don't have an absolute heart attack when I see it, when I know that no one has been in there in days or even weeks. I was in high school when this happened, and I've never had another experience like it. It was the most vivid dream I've ever had. Also, the only dream where my perspective was above the scene rather than in it. I was in a house, and it was very dark. I didn't have a body, but it didn't seem odd to me. I didn't recognize the house and had never been there before. I was in the living room looking around. Wooden floors, red drapes, fireplace, doorway to the left. All the lights were off, but I could still see inside from street lamps outside. I noticed there was a body of an old man hanging from the ceiling from a cord. He was clearly deceased. I had never seen this man before. I was staring at him and didn't notice anyone entering the room. A grown man screamed, "Dad!" and it startled me. So much so that I snapped awake. It felt so real. It was like the scream was right next to me. My ears were still ringing from the noise. I walked around the house to see if anyone was awake. Maybe the noise was my family or a TV or something, but only my mum was awake. It was really late, like maybe 3 or 4 in the morning. She groggily looked at me and asked what I was doing. I asked if she heard a noise and she said no, looking confused. I tried to brush it off, but I had a really bad feeling about my grandfather. I decided I would call my dad the next day, just to be sure. I came home from school and called him first thing. He said he was fine, and I asked about my grandfather. He said my grandfather was fine too, and I sighed in relief. He said it was funny, I asked, because my grandfather's friend committed suicide that night and was found by his son in the living room. I was speechless. I didn't say anything about the dream, because my dad is very judgy and skeptical. The whole dream aside, I thought it was so strange, because I'm not close with his side of the family at all, and had never met that man before. I don't know why I would have travelled there. When I was a kid, growing up in rural South Carolina, I lived in a very broken home. My grandfather raised me until I was old enough to start school, and then I went to live with my parents and brother, who was a year older. My dad was a truck driver, and my mom worked at the local truck shop. My parents were very abusive to each other, and to my brother and I. My mom was extra mean towards me. Anyways, there was this figure that stayed around the house that in the past year I've learned is the entity described as the Hat Man. The Hat Man would make itself seen during all hours of the day and night, both in the home and around the property. Everyone who spent any time around the home had seen it. One night, when my mother and her co-worker friend got off work, they decided to grab some food and hang out at the house. Mom's friend had her boyfriend tag along with them. The boyfriend saw the entity in the house, and it scared him so bad, he ran out and refused to enter the house again. At one point, my parents had a preacher come pray over the property, even though they weren't religious people. Nothing changed. The strange thing is that I was never afraid of the entity. I actually found comfort in knowing it was around and would get slightly excited when I would see it. My home life was really bad at that time. My parents beat each other routinely, and when they got along, they'd be violent to my brother and I. Looking back, I wonder if things being so terrible was the reason I wasn't afraid. Figured it couldn't be much worse than my reality. We continued to see this entity until a few things happened, and they happened quickly, so I'm not sure what the break was. We moved into another home across town, about the time we got moved in. My father got a DUI, resulting in him losing his truck driver's license and needing to change his life in a hurry to keep from losing everything. Right after he got his DUI, he and my mother went to church and changed their lives forever. They never went back to that old lifestyle, and Dad eventually became a preacher years later. I never saw the entity again after the move. So I just thought I'd share what happened over the weekend. Saturday night, I was watching my son, who is non-verbal autistic and has severe OCD related to his autism. He's 8 years old and very much a challenge every day. His mother had to work inventory at her job, which left her working that night, which isn't common. Anyways, I'm laying in bed with my son huddled up close behind me, in the dark, with a lot of things going on in my mind. Most prominently in my thoughts are memories of my grandfather, who I lived with as a child and raised me until I started school. After I started school, I went to live with my parents, but would still stay with my grandpa every weekend. My grandfather passed away when I was 19 years old in a workplace accident at the age of 76. My grandfather used to tell me, "One day, I'm going to tell you how you saved my life." And I just laugh it off, as the idea of me saving his life wasn't plausible to me. He was a mountain of a man who had served in the US Navy in World War II as an underwater demolitions team member. He had stories that Hollywood movies are made of from his time in the war. He was a rough and tumble guy after he got out of the military, and even served time in prison for safecracking back in the 50s. He didn't settle down really until I was born, and 7 days after my birth I went to live with him, and he raised me in a home in the woods at the end of a mile-long dirt road. He was my hero, so to think I had ever saved his life was beyond comprehension. Fast forward to current times, and me raising my mentally disabled son. I struggle a lot. A lot of the time when I'm struggling with my son, I reflect on when my grandfather was raising me. I wasn't mentally disabled, but I was a challenge looking back. Some days I get beaten down and downtrodden and just want to check out for good. The only thing that has kept me around on some of the hardest days is knowing my son will need me in the future. As I laid in bed thinking about all of this, my son got up and went to turn the hallway light on, as he doesn't like to sleep in absolute darkness. He got back in bed and huddled up close beside me, and I thought, maybe that's it. Maybe that's how I saved my grandfather's life that he never got to explain to me. Maybe he, too, at one point, was at the end of his rope, and it was me that gave him the will to hang around. At that point, the closest to the bedroom door closed, as if it was pushed shut by someone. Freaked the hell out of me, pending the weight of all that was on my mind when it happened. I jumped up and searched for anything that could have caused it. It wasn't a soft closure. It was as if someone pushed the door closed. Not slammed or angrily closed, but steady and purposefully. Anyways, it took me about 30 minutes to chill out, including crying. Not sure if he was sending a sign from beyond the grave or what, but it definitely freaked me out. I'm a fairly accident-prone person. I'm so bad that I've broken my toes so often that I can't tell from the pain if it's broken or not. I'm so bad that on a football field of pavement in a parkway, there was a patch of ice that was no bigger than a softball that I somehow managed to slip on and sprain my ankle. So this story about what happened to me was a true event and shouldn't surprise anyone really about my almost death. It's actually kind of funny now, but it was so unfunny then. In Canada, there's a popular tourist spot that's on the border of Canada and the US called Niagara Falls. It's got beautiful waterfalls, plenty of gift shops, hotels, motels, and other activities. One summer, my mum and I went to stay there for a weekend as a vacation. Now, we were pretty poor. Like, this was the first time we could afford a cheap hotel, gas, food, and some touristy stuff, all while being able to afford bills and food. So my mum looked up the cheapest hotels and resorts, restaurants, etc., and planned around that. She found a two-bed hotel with a small bathroom and a mini fridge for $100 a night, so she took it. When we got there, the clerk was nice, and when my mum and I were walking to our room, I saw two pools. An outdoor pool with around 10 dirty, originally white plastic lounge chairs and tables with faded umbrellas around them. The water was filthy, so I immediately decided against that. After my mum and I settled into the room, I told my mum I wanted to go into the indoor pool. It was in a separate building, with one set of white doors, the walls all windows, and about 15 fabric lounge chairs. The water was clean, but no one else was there. No lifeguards, no other guests, no one. So, I changed into my swimsuit and jogged over to it. I put my towel and clothes down, then got into the pool. At 12 years old, I was about 5 feet tall, so I could touch the bottom of most pools. Most pools are very strict, I guess. They usually go on a very slow slope from the shallow to the deep end, just so you know where you're going. However, this pool didn't. This pool dropped immediately to the deep end with no slope or warning. Well, now might be a good time to tell you all that even today, at almost 21 years of age, I can't swim. I like to float around, relax, hang out in pools, and as a kid, I liked to see how far I could go without going too deep. I was doing this when I found out that there was a drop. I took a huge gasp of surprise which filled my lungs with water. I flailed around, trying my best to get to the ledge, still breathing in the water. I screamed for someone to come save me, anyone. I remember seeing a young man who I'd guess was 20 at max across the building from the open door. I saw him look in my direction and walked off. It was at this moment I had resigned myself to dying in that pool. I was sad that my mom would most likely be the one to find me. I was scared about what impact it would have on her, and I was worried about what dying would feel like. I was getting tired from the struggle when I felt two large hands on my back and butt pushing me to the ledge. I pulled myself out weakly, the hands still helping me out. The hands rubbed my and paid my back as I coughed up the water and tried to get my breath. I looked back to thank whoever was helping me, but there was no one. The hands were only really visible from the effect that they had on me, my coughing and the indentation of them. I laid there for a minute, then whispered a thank you to whoever or whatever saved my life that day. Got up, grabbed my stuff, and weakly wobbled over to our hotel room. It's been 8 years since that day. I still don't know how to swim, but I've definitely learned a few things from that experience. First of all, if a place where you could get hurt looks suspicious, get the hell out of there. Second, there's a difference between cheap and inexpensive hotels. People die in cheap hotels. My grandmother passed away in September. She was a great lady, and saying she helped raise me is an understatement. When she passed, I inherited her favourite sewing machine. She was a tailor and seamstress her whole life, and it was one of her favourite possessions. It needs some TLC, but it's a very cool 1930s model Singer in a beautiful cabinet. I ended up putting it in my living room, and a small urn containing some of her ashes is on top. I've had many friends talk about seeing or being visited by dead relatives in dreams or whatnot, if they were particularly close in life. I don't generally believe in that, but was secretly hoping I'd hear something from her after she passed. Never happened, so I kind of forgot about it and moved on. So 3 or 4 weeks ago, My significant other and I were talking while I'm cleaning the living room. The convo was pretty standard. I think we were trying to decide on takeout for dinner. I walked over to dust the sewing machine and was hit with what I can only describe as a wall of scent. It was overpowering and exactly how I remembered my grandmother and her house smelling my entire life. It only lasted a few seconds, but it stopped me cold. It was so strong, it was like she was standing right next to me. The sewing machine was in her house her whole life, but it's been in mine since September, and I've been cleaning it regularly. It doesn't smell like her or her house anymore, and I haven't smelled that scent again since. I'm not sure what caused it, but I like to think it was her telling me that she was at peace or just saying hi. Either way, and it may sound odd, but I miss the way her house smelled, and I'm grateful I got to experience it one more time. This house was the house that my mom grew up in. The woman who raised her owned it, and she ended up renting it from her when I was 8. We lived there until just before my 10th birthday. The first thing happened days after we moved in. We had a beautiful Persian cat that was given to us from a friend. This cat's name was Kiki. He was an extremely obedient cat. He didn't like being on the furniture and absolutely hated being outside. We had him at the house for about 3 days before we never saw him again. We searched the house top to bottom. We looked in every single room, cabinet, under every piece of furniture. We looked outside in bushes, trees. We scanned the alley behind the house and kept an eye on the road in front of the house for his body. He was just gone. There could be logical explanations for that though. About a week after living in the house, I started hearing things while I lied in bed. My brother and I had rooms on the second floor, while my mom and her boyfriends were on the first floor. Every night as I tried to fall asleep, I could hear someone walking up the stairs. Sometimes it sounded like running. Sometimes it sounded like 2 people coming up to them. I also would hear the floorboards of the hallway creak as if someone were pacing across them. I always left my bedroom door open at night because I was afraid to close it. I could see the hallway from my bed. I would hear these footsteps, but never see anyone come into the hallway from the stairs. There was just never anyone there. The school that I went to was across the street from the house. When I was in 2nd grade, I came home and noticed that I didn't see my mum's car in the driveway. Obviously, that meant that she wasn't home. I walked into the house and called for her a few times anyway. Nothing. As I made my way through the house, I started to hear her voice. It sounded like she was having a phone conversation. It was coming from the basement. I called for her once more before making my way to the basement. The moment I placed my foot on the top stair, the talking stopped. I was scared, but I still went down to see if she was there. She wasn't. There was no one in the house. I was the only one there. I ran up those stairs as fast as I could, straight out the front door. I waited on the front lawn for my mom to get home. She showed up about 15 minutes later and asked why I was sitting on the lawn with my jacket and backpack still on. I gave her an excuse. I didn't tell her what happened because I didn't think she'd believe me. I never felt alone in any part of that house, but the basement felt 10 times worse. It was a large basement with 2 large rooms. The first was panelled and carpeted. It had a very small closet-like room in it that was lined with shelves. The second room was the laundry room. It was large, just cement and rock. In the finished room, we had a TV and futon, and my mom's boyfriend weights and workout equipment as well as his guitar collection, all down there. The second summer that we were there, he had bought a new guitar at a yard sale. He was hella geeked about it and brought it into the basement as soon as he got home. He set it on a stand in the centre of the room and went upstairs to call a friend. About 15 minutes later, we smelled smoke and noticed it came from the basement. He ran down there, and his new guitar was on fire. It was burning from the headstock and top of the neck. He put the fire out and looked for a source. There wasn't one. The guitar wasn't plugged into any amp and was not near any walls with outlets, as it was in the centre of the room. He assessed the damage, and the guitar was ruined. The fire burned so hot that it burned through every cord, and the headstock was nearly charred. The last thing that happened in that house was the absolute worst. It was the same summer as the guitar fire. My cousin came over to spend the night. She never slept over before, so we were super excited. It was when we went to bed that all hell broke loose. I had 2 single beds in my room in case I ever had someone over. I was already asleep in my bed when I woke up to the most blood-curdling scream that I've ever heard in my life. I sat up and looked at her, and she was crying and screaming, "Oh my God, did you see it? Did you see it? What was that? Oh my God!" I was sleeping, so I didn't see anything. All I could say was, "What?" My mom and her boyfriend came running up the stairs into my room and asked what was going on. My cousin was fucking hysterical. She was so scared that she couldn't move. My mom's boyfriend had to carry her downstairs. The whole time, I could just hear her crying and saying, "What was that? Did you see it?" I was stunned and in complete horror. I just sat in my bed, too afraid to move. After about an hour, my mom came up and told me that my cousin was going home. I asked my mom what happened, and she told me that everything was okay and not to worry about it. About a week later, I asked my mom about it again, and what she told me chilled me to my bones. She told me that my cousin told her that she heard someone coming up the stairs, and when they reached the top, it was just a big black thing, like a cloud almost, and that when it got into the centre of the hallway, it grew and filled the hallway and blocked out the light. I just looked at my mom. I was so scared that I didn't have any words. She asked me if I had ever seen anything like that in the house. I never saw that, but I did tell her about the footsteps. To this day, I've never spoken to my cousin about it. She's never brought it up, and I'm too afraid to ask her about it. We moved out that autumn. Years later, I brought it all up to my mom and told her everything that I experienced while living there. I was nervous, but I just wanted to tell someone. She surprised me by telling me that she experienced the same things, and some even worse, when she lived there as a kid. She told me she once rolled a ball into the small with the jarred pickled shit in it. She said that the ball stopped in the centre of that room, and that all of the jars shattered. They sat on the shelves. She also told me that the neighbours would often call the police and tell them that my uncle, who was a child at the time, was on the roof running around in his underwear. When the police got there, there was never anyone on the roof. Sometimes this would happen when no one was even home. She said this was a constant thing. All I know is that whatever lives in that house never felt like a human spirit. It didn't feel like an animal. It didn't feel natural. It felt menacing.